The demo I'm doing today is a head and shoulders of a young lady. It's oil on canvas, it's acrylic primed canvas, and if you saw the opening shot of the painting, you'll see that it is very brightly colored. And one of the ways that I like to start a painting, even if it's one that's not going to be as brightly colored as this one turned out to be, I still like to start out with really as bright a colors as I feel like I can, because I always work under the premise that you can always tone down a color. You can always make a color more muddy, but it's really very hard to take a color that's already muddy and brighten it up. Or at least it's much more challenging. And so it's really better to start out with a bright color, and then you can always subdue it later. Now, I'm painting on a really intensely bright green canvas, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that green, for some reason, does tend to make flesh tones seem to just be more realistic, more vibrant. And I think it's probably because, since it's a cool color, that coolness coming through the warm color reacting to with it really makes the warms even more intense. And you'll notice too that she turns out to be a very pretty girl, but all during the painting there's a struggle, and every painting is a struggle. Don't ever think that when you see someone's painting and you see that it's so well done, not that necessarily this one is extremely well done or a masterpiece. All I'm saying is that you can look at a painting that you think is a masterpiece, and you may have in your mind that it just flowed so easy for the artist, and that it's just amazing what a wonderful likeness they got, or what great colors. And one of the beauties of seeing demos like this is that you can see just how the artist struggled, that it wasn't just you put down a stroke that's perfect, exactly where you wanted it, exactly the way you like it, the exactly right color, and then you put down the next one and it's exactly right, the exact right proportion, exact right color, exactly where it should be in relationship to the first brush stroke. No, it sometimes it's very close, other times it's far off. And with each subsequent brush stroke that the artist makes, they pull things together and make them a little closer and a little closer until they get to that right spot where they feel like, okay, I've got a good likeness, I've got good color relationships, I've got good compositional balance. So it's a slow, ongoing process. So like I said, it's really good to see these demos, and it's good for me because I forget sometimes that artists that I really admire, I forget that they struggle as well. And so seeing them lay in a passage that they'll work with sometimes for quite a while, only to wipe it off and start completely over. I'm reminded that John Singer Sargent, there's a story about him where he was doing a woman's portrait, and I think he did the face something like more than 10 times. And she would go in every day and stand there for, several hours. I don't know how many hours, but for many hours posing. And he would paint and work on her face. And at the end of the day, he would literally take a palette knife and scrape it all off. And the next day, she'd go in, He'd work for hours. And this went on for something like 10 days. And on the 10th day, she was so stressed that she fainted. When she saw him scrape it off that last time, she fainted. Well, when she revived, he consoled her and he said, this is a process. It's a struggle, but I really think I've got it now. So tomorrow will be the day. And sure enough, that last day, that 11th day, I guess, he did a perfect, well, you say a perfect likeness. He did the perfect painting as far as he was concerned. As far as a great likeness, he could do that, but he also stylized. John Singer Sargent, don't ever think that he was doing a photographic likeness. He wasn't. That wasn't his intention. He was trying to capture a stylized essence of the person. So we can see photographs of the people that he painted, and well, there you go. You can see me at some point in here just completely obliterating a part of the mouth and starting it over. And I'll come back to that in a second, but this all ties in because what Sargent liked to do was he liked to get things with a feeling of immediacy and not a feeling of just being worked and worked and worked to death. And so if he didn't feel like that he really was getting a good, strong likeness, at some point, if he'd worked on it for too long, he would just wipe it off, start over. His philosophy was it was better to get a fresh start and come at it with a fresh eye than it was to try to just beat and batter a painting into submission. And it takes confidence because you're afraid that all this hard work you've done is going to be thrown away and wasted if you just cover it up or throw it away and start a new one. It's really not the case because anything you do, any practice you do, is going to be a positive. It's going to be helpful to you. So don't think that just because you didn't get that perfect likeness or perfect relationship or color combination on the first, second, or even the 10th try, don't think that that's failure. That's just a part of the process. Part of the process of growing and learning and getting better. And one of the things I like to do is try and put a good amount of paint down on the canvas. So often artists are afraid of the paint, and they're afraid that if they get too much paint down that it'll just become a muddy mess, a sloppy mess that they can't control. And that's possible, but really more often than not, the problem that the artist has is that there's not enough paint on the canvas for them to manipulate the paint property and actually properly, and to actually make it work, make it do what they want it to do. So you're better off to have a decent layer of paint that you can sculpt and move around. Now, for me, one of the, for lack of a better term, I'll say one of the tricks to doing that is you don't want your paint to be overly slick. I get students who ask me all the time, well, what do you add to your paint? Do you do mineral spirits and linseed oil or stand oil or Gamsol? And there's just a host of different things you can add to the paint. And I've used linseed oil, and I have some. I've used a number of different products. But I discovered that for me, they were not helpful. They were not helpful at all. I found that they were actually very often more of a hindrance than anything else, because the problem is they keep your paint really slick and keep it from drying to that tacky stage. The trick to being able, and forgive me for using the word trick, but right now that's sort of just the best term I can think of, but the trick to using really thick paint is that it's tacky. So what that means is paint goes through a drying, curing process, and when it first goes down, it's really very wet and very slick. But then as the vehicle that is used to thin the paint down, as that begins to dry and evaporate, then the paint pigment itself is what's left behind. That, the linseed oil, that right, really perfect balance of linseed oil, it begins to get tacky and want to grip the canvas. And it also means that it wants to grip your paint, the other paint that you're putting down. You see, that's what happens when you put down a lot of paint, you start moving it around, and then you put some more paint on top of it. Well, if the paint that's already down is very goopy, very slick, then the paint that goes on top of it is not going to want to adhere. And what you wind up doing is either digging a furrow with your brush, or just making a mess. It just sort of sloshes all around. Whereas if the paint, that first layer, is really tacky, then it's got a glue-like consistency, and so it's sticking to the canvas. But then any new layer of paint that's laid on top of it, it kind of grabs a hold of it too and wants to hold it down. So it prevents you from making that goopy mess, because the paint is not overly mixing itself together. It's staying a little bit separate. I know a lot of people, they like to put down a layer of paint, let it dry, glaze on top of it, let that dry, and do these thin layers, these thin glazes of paint. And that's an absolutely legitimate way of painting. I've done that a little bit, but I don't really have the patience or the time for that. As those who've watched a lot of my videos, they know I'm an illustrator, and so many of my works, they have to be done very quickly. They have to be done sometimes overnight. I did a portrait. It was real small, but like a half-length portrait for a movie, and they literally sent me the pictures one afternoon, and they needed the painting back. They needed an image of the painting the next day. It was later the next day, but I got it done basically overnight. Well, there's no time for glazing, obviously. But now, to be fair, there are techniques. There are. Let's see. How do I say it? If you want a painting to look a certain way, then glazing is the only way you can do it. Thin veils of color that are transparent, where the light is traveling through all of those layers of color and then hitting the surface that you painted on and then bouncing back up through those layers. Well, that gives a depth and a glow to the painting that you can't get with an impasto look. And I'm not trying to pretend like you can, because you absolutely cannot. So if you're wanting to paint with that sort of deep inner glow that a lot of artists can produce, then the way I'm showing you now is most definitely not the way you want to paint. You do want to do slow, deliberate layering. I like the look. I appreciate artists who do that, but that's not the way I like to paint. Now, another thing students will ask me, of course, is they're curious, what colors are you using? What brushes are you using? I have mostly throughout my career used either Utrecht or Rembrandt colors. A lot of it is just because they were some of the cheaper colors around, but I do have some Winsor Newton, some Lafranc Bougeot. Really, the manufacturing of most of these colors is so well done, to my knowledge, that you really can't go wrong with any of the brands. It's just A, what you can afford, B, what are you used to, because they're different. They're all different. But C, which one appeals to you the best. There are certain colors, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just I don't, or certain manufacturers rather, there's nothing wrong with them. I just don't prefer their colors a lot of times. I like Permalba white, for instance, but sometimes I like it mixed with another white. Permalba colors are very creamy and very thin, whereas certain other colors, I keep saying colors, but I mean really certain other brands are much thicker and stiffer. And I don't like either one if it's overly exaggerated. I don't like a really thick, hard, tacky paint. I don't like a really thin, almost watery paint. There's, for me, just that happy medium that I'm always looking for. And Rembrandt colors have tended to be sort of in that sweet spot. They're not too creamy, not too fluid, but then not too stiff and thick either. But it's something that, as your budget allows for, just purchase different brands and see which one you like the best. I will tell you that you cannot trust the names of the colors. For instance, you can buy cadmium yellow light in one color and it will be as dark and orange as cadmium yellow deep with some other manufacturers. And I ran into that one time where I bought several different color yellows from different manufacturers, and I wound up with about 5 tubes of essentially cadmium yellow deep and not a single tube of cadmium yellow, true cadmium yellow light, which is a much cooler, lemony color. They're both good. It's just that you can't get the bright, vibrant greens and oranges with one that you can with the other. So, and they're just, a bright, super lemony yellow you can't get with cadmium yellow deep. It's got too much sort of a reddish, orangish tone to it to begin with. So I like having both. So that's another reason why years ago, I've been doing this for over 30 years. Years ago, I would experiment. I'd buy all these different manufacturers, and I finally settled on Utrecht and Rembrandt. Again, because I could afford it. They were certainly a lot less expensive, but I just knew what I was getting. I didn't have to wonder, well, is this yellow going to be sort of an orange yellow or a bluish yellow? And if I get a red, is it going to be a warm orangey red, or is it going to be a bluish red? So it's just, for me, I've gotten to where I trust those brands. But the others are great, and if someone gave me some, I would certainly use them and enjoy them very much. And at some point you'll see that the likeness, or you don't have the picture up there so you can't tell, but she's certainly becoming a prettier girl. The likeness I was striving for is beginning to come together into gel. And then I really wanted to jump in and really make this a bold, fun painting, and that's where I started taking my palette knife and scooping up color and laying it down and being very bold about it and taking sort of a bright blue and a bright green and a bright orange and scrubbing it, or just slathering it rather, over a face that I'd already done, which wasn't bad. It was a nice little painting, even if I hadn't done that to it. But I wanted to take it further. I really wanted to make the colors very rich and vibrant. And it's hard to do that with just a brush. You just don't get the intensity of the color. So that's where I like to take the palette knife and really scoop up a bunch of color and lay it down. And then you've got something that you can work with. If it's too bright, not a problem. Take some of the color you've already laid down and just sort of start mixing it around in it and toning what you put down down. But as you can see, it would be real easy for me to take the colors that I've laid down that are super bright and intense. It'd be real easy for me to knock them down. But to brighten up, what I'd have to do is just what I did earlier, is scoop up a whole lot of paint and lay it on top of it and really put in some intense color. So it's doable. It's just more challenging to brighten up a dull area than it is a light area. For me, it requires putting down a lot more paint. You may be thinking, well, at what point is there too much paint? I guess when it truly does become just impossible to mix it around. But boy, you'd be surprised at just how much paint you can have down on that canvas and still be able to manipulate it and move it around without any problem. Once you're confident that you can do it. Now, if you're not confident, then it'll get away with you. But once you really get used to getting your hands in there, as it were, and pushing that paint around, you'll find that it's really not that difficult. It's actually kind of fun, or very fun. It can be a lot more fun. I'll tell you, I don't like having a painting where the paint is super thin and it's like you're scrubbing the canvas trying to get the paint to move around. I don't like that. It's very difficult for me, and I prefer to have enough paint on the canvas that I can actually move it around. All right, well, I think that's about enough. I really enjoyed you being here. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll put on some music and let that finish this painting out. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Arthropologist, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more episodes like this, think about subscribing. I'm Bill Wilson, and I'm The Arthropologist.